All right, good morning, hello, and welcome to the Coach's Corner brought to you by the Endurance Lab, where you can join us as we recap the week and answer your questions from the forum. My name's Jason Flores, one of our Endurance Lab coaches, and today I'm joined by Coach Ian Murray, Mitch Stangerman, and our nutritional therapist, Andrea Cullen. Good morning, everybody. It's good to have everybody back. I know everyone was doing a little bit of travel, a little bit of racing, but everyone's back on the podcast to share their stories and answer some questions and bring a little bit from what we have had our adventures in. So, how's everybody doing? Good?
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
I'm sore.
Glad to be home.
Sore. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. I know travel can definitely be difficult. Just before the podcast here, we are talking about never eating anything on an airplane. Ian had some friends that missed that memo and ended up sick off the plane, and we know all of that can be bad.
Yeah, they're doing rapid weight loss right now.
Yeah.
Yesterday.
I guess that's good in intervals. I guess could be good. Like on your off season, is that an off season tactic? We've talked about that before. So along that, with calorie restriction, I guess that's one way to do calorie. I don't know how do you put calories out versus restricting, but we wanted to talk a little bit about calorie restriction. Jump into the topics today, specifically about when you're recovering, but not just recovering during intervals or recovering during workouts, but recovering during injury. There was a recent video that was put out, and just talk kind of in general. And we've talked about a little bit about this before, but specifically with injury, it's very, very important that you're getting things in. And we wanted to share a little bit of tips, especially here at mid, kind of early season, mid season for some of you. Make sure that you have the tips and things on hand to know what you need to do. And we're going to send it over to Andrea. She's going to start off, and then we're going to have a little discussion here. So
yeah, so I thought I'd start with two sort of broad definitions, and one of them is energy availability, because for some reason athletes, when they're not training, think I don't need to eat very much, because I'm not training, or I don't deserve it, or whatever messed up line of thinking we can get ourselves into. So what is energy availability? It is the energy intake minus the energy expended. So our bodies expend energy through normal functioning as well as through exercise. So we need energy for more than just training. So essential functions that would be relevant to the athlete will be your immune system, your gastrointestinal health, your endocrine system, which is your hormones. So one sign of low energy availability in the athlete can be low estrogen in a woman and low testosterone in the male. Our musculoskeletal systems are constantly repairing the bones and the soft tissue, or they're setting down bones and resorbing bone minerals, our soft tissue. That's why they say to train, if you're doing a lot of impact sports, to train in cycles so that you're giving the joints and soft tissue a rest. The cardiovascular system, the hematological system. So having blood test results, for example, for an athlete, they might show up some low white blood cell markers, and that could be a sign of low energy availability. The nervous system, which would include your adrenal system. So our bodies are doing way more than just training on a daily basis.
Well,
we're not aware of it. Yep.
It sounds like what you're saying is your body is a complex energy system.
yeah.
Yeah, it is. And it's dynamic, and it's changing how it's deciding what to go here, there, and everywhere. The uncontrollable, so to speak. So another definition that is tremendously helpful, and something that in functional medicine we've been more aware of in sport of late, that has been talked about and is getting accepted and not accepted by some people who are only invested in athlete triad syndrome. But that would be called relative energy deficiency in sport, shortened to REDS. And that refers to impaired physiological functioning caused by a relative energy deficiency. And it includes, but is not limited to, impairment of metabolic rate. So you could see like low thyroid function, menstrual function, bone health. So it's not only the women that can suffer from bone health problems. We see this in male cyclists, especially if they're really trying to shave weight. immunity, so getting sick a lot, protein synthesis, so poor recovery, and cardiovascular health. But we tend to see a lot of psychological issues as well going on. Now, they're probably going to add more and more. If you ask me, like you were saying, energy is connected to everything. So our bodies will try and create a pecking order system. So there's going to be a cost somewhere if we're not getting enough, and that may vary for individuals based on genetics, who knows. So when you're injured, your body has to do a huge amount to heal. So I delved into this over 10 years ago. I had a huge fascination in what was happening with rugby players on the team I was working with when they were injured. So someone would have a surgery or have an injury, and they'd be prescribed a certain healing time by the consultant. And I used to go into the orthopedic books and look at, well, what is the body actually trying to do? And how does that sync in with the theoretical basis of nutrition and where I can support them? And I had some players that completely invested in, let's beat the consultant and do everything that we can to get ourselves back. And then you had others that didn't care. More, I'd say it was just that the injury was messing with their mind, and they didn't have the energy to bring themselves back into getting themselves better faster. So there used to be weeks in the difference with return to play. So we would look at, when there's an injury, I would look at, well, what's the body actually trying to do? How important is the circulation system? How important, are we trying to heal nerves? What's the lymphatic system trying to do? Is there inflammation? What's the immune system trying to manage? Is there soft tissue and bone repair that is needed? Even the hormonal systems are involved, our levels of testosterone, estrogen. So all of this takes energy and specific nutrients. And so you need to really think about helping your body. The first sign that our body is using energy to heal us is, I don't know if any of you have noticed, but when you have an injury, you feel really, really tired.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it could be just like a torn ligament in your ankle, and you're like, wow, why am I needing so much sleep? But your body is trying to prioritize energy for healing and repair. So if you can understand it that way, you need to eat to support your body with quality nutrition to get it to support what the body's trying to do.
Well, and right there is something you said is very key, because I think too many people think when we talk energy, you got to have energy. You got to do. They mistake the word energy for what you get out of maybe a stimulant, whether it's sugar, coffee. Yeah, and that's something that's very important. That your energy, and I'm talking what your body needs to consume, or what your body consumes and then produces to have those functions, whether it's healing or working out or whatever. That all comes from everything you take in. And so, like we talk about all the time about your nutrition for a race, the nutrition for your day-to-day bodily function is just as important. So if you look at that energy, what we're looking at, it's what is your body getting? Not cheap energy, not sugar, not caffeine, which I love caffeine, don't get me wrong. But that's just a straight up stimulant. That does not help. And so you have to look at it from a chemical or chemical perspective of energy, not I feel good level of energy. That's two different things. Completely.
That's a really good analogy to bring in actually, because when we're racing, we can actually get away with junk carbs because we are just looking for fueling. But some people carry this mentality over into injured. They might think, oh, Andrea said eat lots when I'm injured and I'm going to sit on the sofa and go through those jelly babies. But you need the quality then also to, like, your essential fatty acids, your amino acids, your glyconutrients, your minerals, and your vitamins. They're all doing structural functions or helper. I suppose we can call it helper functions. And it's like let's just say it was a bone injury. It's like trying to build a skyscraper without raw material if you don't get the nutrients in that you need.
Well, and the other part too, I think, is people need to understand when you have an injury, it's really important to consult a nutritionist, nutritional therapist, or somebody, because there are certain things that are good for you in general that actually inhibit healing of certain things. So certain vegetables don't necessarily go well with bone healing because of
oxalates. Yeah.
And so depending on what injury you have, you may need to adapt your diet to that. I mean, personally, I think pizza works well for healing any energy, or any injury. But No, but seriously, you need to take a look at it, because if you think you're doing the right thing, but you're actually consuming something that's inhibiting that healing, some things don't inhibit inflammation, or they make it so your swelling goes down, but maybe your body actually needs to have a little bit of that swelling to get the blood to it. So there are different things you want to look at and really consult somebody. Otherwise, you could be doing more harm than good.
Right. So on that, talking about anti-inflammatory things, specifically in this sort of situation, a lot of the attention kind of goes to anti-inflammatory like fats, right? I'd imagine making sure you're getting these things in where your body has the nutrients it needs in order to make the changes it needs so that you can recover from injury. I've seen a couple things come across, things like olive oil, avocados, fish oil. Making sure we're getting these things in and not getting things in like processed foods, vegetable oils, things with trans fat, staying away from those. Obviously, we always kind of put out like we want you to have a healthy diet, but specifically things to manage your inflammation. I'll pass it back to Andrea here because I know there's, as far as like herbs and spices, there's things that you can kind of make sure you're focusing on. I know, big things are like turmeric. I'm sure this list goes on, but some of the bigger things, making sure you're getting into the diet could be very, very important during this time as far as recovering from injury.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think like Mother Nature has sort of created a pharmacopoeia of natural substances, but they're all kind of created in foods in such a balance that if we're eating a lot of turmeric or ginger or berries or green tea, et cetera, it never really hits a dose that's too great for our bodies, where it's creating too much of a suppression of inflammation. Our body is smart, and nature links in with that. Whereas on the flip side, we see that high doses of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs taken to heal, say, a ligament actually can impede the healing process, because some inflammation is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think the hard part too on that is, so in the Army we call it Ranger candy, 800 milligram Motrin. But the concept is, if you need to get through whatever you're doing to accomplish what you have to get done, okay, fine. But I think too many people go, my knee hurts, so I'm going to take Motrin and then train through it. And then they continue to not change their nutrition to meet an injury need, and they continue to run on something and just mask the pain, which makes it much worse over a long period of time.
It's funny because, like, Jason, you be able to tell us this. I'm sure Rylan says why all the time. But why? But why? And yet as adults then, when we have pain, the first thing we should ask is why?
Exactly.
So that then we can figure it and do something about it. But we take a medicine and don't ask the correct questions.
Yeah.
I've seen people like,
there's a time to be tough. There's a time to be tough, and then there's a time that tough is stupid. Tough is during the race. That's when you be tough. 3-4 weeks out. Yeah, mostly. That's true. Like Tim DeBoom back, 15, 18 years ago, who passed a kidney stone in Kona.
Oh my God.
Passed his second one in the ambulance in Kona.
I mean,
while running.
Personal example is going into a race knowing you're injured but doing it anyway, and then finding out the day after the race you have 3 stress fractures. Not tough, right? That's just stupid.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, thinking along those lines, we're all part of like community race cycling clubs in our local area, and people talking about their nutrition and preempting the pain that they're having with before their ride. They're taking this anti-inflammatory, and it's just nuts. Like, you just want to like pull them aside and be like, are you sure this is what we need? And I think that's important. But talking about different supplements, there are things that we should be getting, right? Specific vitamins that may not be available in our diet. Andrea, are there things that we can make sure that we're putting in? I know vitamin A, vitamin C, those sort of things, but
so if we're looking at an injury, I suppose trying to understand or talk to the orthopedic surgeon or whoever is working with you, what are the limiting factors to my healing here? Is it that this tendon really doesn't get any blood supply, or is it that it just needs a lot of nutrition to heal? Or to try and see if there's any limiting factors that you can support, as well as, like, you can't go wrong with a general, really clean, nutrient-rich, vegetable and fruit-rich healing diet with your proteins, et cetera, and your healthy fats. And then, you can support circulation. So your ginger and your turmerics and things like that, herbs, rosemary, garlic are going to help with circulation. Specific nutrients. So if it's the bones, your vitamin D, your vitamin K, calcium, magnesium, zinc, for example. Bone and soft tissues are going to require quality protein. So if you're a vegetarian or vegan, you really need to up your game and being organized with getting your protein sources in the diet. And if you're a meat eater, just choosing meats that would be less inflammation promoting. So including a fair amount of fish, oily fish, some vegetarian proteins, along with your red meat and your dairy products, but not going to OTT on the red meat and dairy, which can be a little bit inflammatory promoting. But the quality of the protein is paramount there. Mm-hmm. Preventing muscle wastage. So just say you have your left leg in a boot or a cast, muscle loss is going to be your main worry there. And things like glutamine, creatine, HMB, leucine, they may be helpful. I think creatine helps everything. So there's a pretty good amount of evidence there. You want to not allow too much muscle loss, and keeping on top of your protein intake is going to be important for that as well. And I suppose getting back to mobility as soon as possible. And there's conflicting, I'm not an orthopedic or a physio or stuff but I do think there's a little bit of conflicting information out there on how fast you return to mobility. And to me, it would seem that the faster you can get back to mobility, whatever you're doing, even if it's just moving in a pool, probably is helpful to prevent muscle loss.
Yeah. Yeah, it is important that when you're doing that if you have a break or a significant tear or something, that getting back to mobility, it's like anything else. Don't push it until it hurts and say, okay, that's my limit.
Yeah.
You should be stopping well before that as you get back into mobility. And honestly, if you have certain injuries, hamstrings, elbows, shoulders, they are all what I call the bastard injuries, because especially hamstrings and shoulders, because they will feel great for like 2 or 3 workouts when you try to get right back to it. And they were like, oh yeah, man, we're good. It's all right. Just push a little bit. It's fine. And you have one workout you push and you're like, oh, I'm good to go. And the next workout, they just like, we're injured again. So
yeah.
You have to be very careful.
That's an interesting one I used to notice with the rugby players. So when you read and understood the timeline of an injury, and then you saw when they were allowed back to play, there's a vast difference. So you're still healing when you get back to performance or training, and you need to be mindful of that and continue on supporting that. Like bones and tendons and ligaments, they're going to be healing for a long time and re-strengthening for a long time.
Yeah. And I had a doc I know, an orthopedic, real big guy. He did a lot of surgeries for the Jets and the 49ers. So he's a pretty well-respected orthopedic. And he always said the shoulder is one thing you just can't mess with, because it makes no sense from pure physiology and biomechanics why the shoulder actually works. If you just look at it on face value until you really go and understand the complex system of what your shoulder actually is. So it's one of those, it's the joint that causes the most problems, because every little change or every little thing that's off can impact 3 or 4 different. It's like constantly chasing a bug.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, brutal. But no, it's important. And one of the reasons we brought this up is because there's a video that came out from Lionel Sanders, who you guys know I like to make fun of him every now and then. But he's a dude's an absolute beast, but he does some stupid things from time to time. But he broke his sacrum, and the funny part is listen to the story of how he did it.
Yeah.
He stopped at a water fountain to get a drink, but was feeling really good. Now he's normally an indoor rider, and he's not known as a skilled bike handler. And he didn't unclip and leaned over on the water fountain to get a drink.
Oh my god!
And kind of lost his balance and then just fell back over onto his left butt. So he was staying still and just fell over on the bike, and that's how he broke it. But he actually trained on it, and he continued to train for a little bit, and then it was just like weird problems, and he thought it was a sciatic issue, and then finally they got an MRI and found out it was broken. But it's a very small break, so it didn't displace it, so it's healing up. But yeah, And he actually commented for the first time he was being smart and he was eating because he's one of those guys that is always an issue with his weight. And so it was brought up to him that he needed to continue to eat to heal. And that's why I bring this up, because the guy, that guy and cyclists in general are all about losing weight and staying at race weight. And I really thought this is something that we should cover, because we all make mistakes and get injured. And then we all go, oh, but I don't want to put on those 2 kilos, not understanding that you probably aren't going to put on any weight unless you overeat, because your body, like Andrea said, needs that to work those energy systems. And you'd be surprised how many calories you burn just healing.
Is he still vegan at the moment?
I don't know.
It's just interesting because he did say in the video that he had his vitamin D levels checked and they were really low. And I thought to myself, well, there's more than just vitamin D involved with bones. So vitamin D, vitamin K, which is very rarely spoken about, and your calcium and your minerals, they all sort of work together. But vitamin D is a fat-soluble nutrient. So, we need some help. Obviously, this is why we need some fats in our diet. And there's 2 different forms of vitamin K, and one of those comes from dairy and meat products or fermented vegan products. So this is where, eating all around. So all of those weird foods we throw out occasionally, there's a reason we need lots of different things in our diet and variety, and not just the same thing over and over in a restricted way. But it was unusual to hear he had low vitamin D, given he would be outside. And that's where it's important sometimes to have small bursts outside without sun cream slathered all over us. So we do actually make vitamin D. And also vitamin D gets made in our skin. Right. So if we have been out in the sun, don't jump in the shower straight away and get the soap out, because you'll actually remove the fat from the skin that's making your vitamin D.
That's interesting.
So do you guys, those 3 days in Ireland where you have sun, do you guys just not shower?
Yeah, there you go.
Well, we only have baths here, Ian. Outside.
Outside baths in the rain. The water running off the roof into the bath. There you go. That's our view. Really quick before we switch topics, I know one thing that we hear a lot from our athletes or kind of in popular media is what to do immediately after you do get an injury. Part of that, and I just wanted to make sure that we touched on it, because there has been some conflicting information. Everyone talks about getting the common, RICE, or the rest, ice, compression, and elevation. With a lot of the reading that we've had, a lot of that has kind of moved aside to make sure that we're getting things like we talked about. We brought in making sure we get movement when we can, compression to get the lymphatic system going, and then elevation when needed to kind of bring all of that stuff. These are all in movements to get the body healed up, along with all the other things we're talking about. A lot of the trying to stop the inflammation or trying to seize up things and not move them completely. We need to make sure that the body can start to heal itself. And I just wanted to make sure we got that point out as well, along with the diet things that we're talking about here.
Yeah, and another thing we can all do, which is when we have a fall or hurt ourselves, adrenaline takes over and you don't actually feel what you've done, and then you get back on your bike and you cycle home on that broken ankle or something. I suppose it's maybe being conscious of, should I get back up here, or should I call for someone to get me home?
Well, who was it either last year or the year before in Tour of California that crashed and had this massive concussion and got back up on their bike?
But who let him get back on the bike? I mean, at some point there's a
car. It wasn't a team car or the dock. It was just neutral support. He crashed. He got up and was like stumbling around, and like he was in the brake and he crashed, and the peloton came zipping by him later, and it was like almost like a drunk dude in the middle of the road that the peloton was going around on a downhill from the mountain. And he got back on his bike, but they stopped him because he just basically was like, he couldn't even get his clipped in. It was bad, but they were going to let him get on his bike. But that's one of those things. You got to know what happened to you. If you can't tell what happened to you, it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, I think it was Tom Scoons, if you remember him, from Tour of California.
That's who it was.
Yeah. He was like kind of really wobbly and all that. Yeah, it's 2017. Punchy. Yeah, it was nuts. And a lot of questions about concussions and specifically in cycling were brought up around that time. I do remember that. But yeah, I think that's really important. All right. So you at home, if you have any questions about kind of what we talked about today, we're going to put a couple links together. I found a nice infogram from Precision Nutrition, but essentially focusing on a whole food anti-inflammatory diet, super important. Couple really solid definitions as far as kind of the different things as far as how we use energy during this time we brought up. And if you have any questions, definitely let us know. All right, we're going to slide on over to a couple articles of the week. I'm going to send this over to Mitch. This is about 2 weeks off, but I think, as I went back and I really delved into this article, Cycling Tips put some great articles together specifically about power outputs for athletes. I'm going to let him introduce this, but they've always put out these for some of the big races. This one specifically was for Tour of Flanders, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of what we're looking at here. So, Mitch?
Yeah, so I agree with Jason. These articles are kind of like my cycling porn in some way. And this one is about the women's race. I think Cycling Tips does this. I think Training Speaks does it as well. They do it for a lot of triathlons, and you'll get to really look at the power output through a race. This one was really cool because it actually went through a lot of the different riders in the race. So I'd recommend everybody come and click on it. And it walked through the whole race from the beginning to the initial climbs, to the later climbs, and then to the final sprint. And just touching on a couple highlights that we can discuss maybe if you want. What was really interesting was, early in the race there was a breakaway, and they compared the power numbers from the break and then to the peloton. And so the break was putting out about 40% more power than the peloton over the first 30 minutes of the race, which is really interesting when you think about it, that these riders initially they weren't right on the edge, but they were really pushing hard, and they still had like 150 kilometers of racing to go after this point. And then what was also interesting to me was they got into the early climbs and the differences between the two groups. So the break was much more steady, and their power output was more like, I don't want to say it like you'd see in a triathlon, but it was just much more consistent and steady. But then the chasers were really pushing on the uphills, and then I think recovering a little bit on the downhill. So their power was much more erratic and up and down. And then as they got into the final climbs, it's just like all hell broke loose, right? The break was doing everything they could to stay away. The chasers were trying to stay with the chase, and they were trying to close. So it was just a really frenetic pace, and it all came down to, I think, about 30 people in the end, and a final sprint where I think the winner had 10-second power of 13.75 times, and about she broke over 1,000 watts at 15.5 times for her peak power. So I mean. And to think you did that after a long race, I mean, that's what I really enjoy and I get out of these. Isn't kind of like the 1 second or like the one tidbit, but the ability over a sustained period of time with a lot of stress to continue to make these performances. And I think it's kind of humbling, and then I think it also allows us to really understand the sacrifice and kind of relate to ourselves.
Yeah, I think tactics go to a lot of this. We see races out there all the time, and being able to close the gaps that were out there at this race specifically really took. It's odd because Peloton is a weird thing. As the group kind of gets together, and you have to get people motivated to go. Otherwise, things just kind of roll away. You know what I mean? We see this all the time if people aren't motivated enough. But oppositely, people in the break need to be sufficiently motivated to know that group of people that are there are committed enough that they're going to put the effort out at that steady pace to keep going, because it is a small group and you can't surge and you can't get on the front and do hero pulls. You're going to need to make sure that you kind of getting yourself in a cycle where everybody's helping, at least until you get to a point where you guys are far enough away.
Well, I think the other part to remember is when we look at this, it's hard to compare it. We always try to compare these races to what we all do.
Yeah.
Like, why is this different than the Cat 3 race, the P1T race that I did? Well, these are professionals for one, but the other thing to remember is for almost all of our races on the amateur level, there's no doing my job and then just getting in the van, right?
Yeah.
But so remember, there's a third of these men and women in the pro peloton that outside of stage racing, they have no intention of finishing that day. Yeah. There is zero intention of finishing, and in fact, their director sportifs have no intention of them finishing the day. So it's not even that they're just going to pack it in.
Right.
Their job is to do what they have to do, and then sit up, wait for the sag wagon, and get in it and save it for another day. So they may be sitting there in the peloton in the back for the first hour, and then they have to go to the front and work for the next 90 minutes all out, blow their legs out, and then out the back So you get to watch these leaders who have their teams tearing up the break. But, it's one of those things that is very impressive to watch as far as a leader. If you watch their power, how they maintain control, how they hold their position, how they don't overcook anything, and how they do a great job. But try not to look at how things work out in the bunch on the pro field compared to your local Cat 5 race.
Yeah, Tuesday night ride.
Yeah, the Tuesday Night Worlds. Because and the other part to remember is a lot of these men and women are up for contract. And so if they don't do exactly what their director tells them what to do, they don't get a contract the next year. So if your director tells you go to the front and blow your legs up, by destroying the field, well, that's what you do. Otherwise, you're fired. I don't see anybody getting fired on a Zwift race.
Yeah, the conversation. I mean, all of us have got our our athletes, and we go over their power files after. I recently had a couple actually ODZ riders in the Pacific Northwest, racing. And one thing I reminded all of them, the ones that were our athletes or not, is that don't forget that nobody is paying you to race this weekend. You are racing it for yourself. And yes, you have team members there, but you want to make sure that you get what you want to get out of this race. So again, bringing it back to kind of why you race this race and what you're going to get out of it. And just remember, in the end, there isn't going to be this like huge 4-man group that's going to like magically form in front of you as you come into the final 1500. But in fact, everyone had their own wins, whether it
That's very millennial of you.
Yeah. Thank you. And so
I think,
go ahead, Andrea, go ahead.
Yeah, just listening to Mitch describing the power outputs for the women, like it is amazing how strong these girls are. And, they are eating and fueling and training for strength. And then go on to women's normal personal cycling forum, how much of an emphasis there always seems to be on weight loss and calorie cutting. And it's totally counter to wanting to be a strong cyclist. And if we want to be good female cyclists, we are going to have to put weight on our legs. That's and women are lucky in that we can stay, small surface area on the top, but women are, the cyclists are strong, and that requires eating and fueling. I very much, like, if you find out any statistics, Mitch, on if there's a keto female cyclist, I would love to hear it, but I would very much doubt that there is. And yet the ordinary folks were all trying to do that for some reason.
I mean, go ahead, Ian. And
I'd say the interesting thing is, you brought up a really good point. These ladies who are doing this, they're extremely strong. If you look at pro men cyclists, and I'm not talking the Cancellaras and the workhorse guys. I'm talking the climbers, the pro tour guys. They are just absolutely bone thin. They look like famine victims. Well, but the women tend to look healthy.
Yes.
Yeah,
right,
the women tend to look a little healthier. It's quite amazing, and I'm actually, when I first started watching, I was like, oh, they need to skinny up a little bit when they do this. But when you look at their power numbers, they don't need to skinny up, and frankly, it's much better. They're pretty good races to watch, and I think they're doing it a healthier way than the men are.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
So my comment was going to be really about what Andrew was talking about in the forums, and I think so many people need to kind of ask themselves when they get into whatever they're doing, whether it's running or it's cycling, whatever the endeavor is why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you want to be in the top 10 in a half marathon, or are you doing it because you want to be healthy and lose weight, and this is your avenue by which you're going to do it? Because I think there's two different approaches for what you're doing and how you're going to ultimately approach that sport. And I think a lot of people get confused and they get seduced by different purposes, right? You get into it because you want to be healthy and you want to lose weight, but then you start chasing numbers, and the way you're preparing and approaching it are kind of a contradiction to one another.
Depends on what kind of Instagram followers you want.
This is true. So yeah, I mean, definitely, if you have a chance to click on the article, take a look at these numbers. If you do any type of kind of data crunching, you can kind of get an idea of the real power that these racers are putting out. But definitely taking that into consideration, kind of on what your goals are and the kind of things that you need to kind of look at. And I think that's where this is always interesting. We do have
good. One last thing.
Yeah.
In this, when for all the guys out there who are like, women racing, whatever. It's like a WNBA. Yeah. See if you can do 15.5 watts a kilo after 150K. Because
yeah.
I'm going to go with you can't.
Yeah.
Even we only say 15.5 watts a kilo. Break 1,000 watts on a sprint after 150K. I'm going to go with you can't. So when you can do that, then we can have a discussion about why you're much better than women racing. But it also can't be Z power, and you can't have messed with the slope. It has to be out on the road.
Yeah. So I mean, those numbers are astronomical. I mean, we see a lot, especially in these races, because they're single day races on the women's race, and I feel like the energy that they have, because a lot of their stages are shorter or less stages. I think they just really race with heart, and they just put everything out there, Yeah,
but let's face it, the first hour and a half or 2 hours of most of the men's races, they're just screwing around and stopping to pee all the time. They're just trying to shove their junk to camera.
It's the part that you don't. It's the part that you don't see, and when you go and see like a live race and you're kind of following it along, you're like, oh gosh, that's like, I like it when it's all packaged and put together, I guess, at the end.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, Paris-Roubaix was interesting because it was just full
single
gas,
day,
full
right, single day classics.
But even other ones, normally Paris-Roubaix is boring for the first 100K.
Yeah.
This one, it just wasn't, because everyone just said, quick step, you're not going to have this one.
Yeah, they've had a really great year, but yeah.
All
right, so we had one more.
Real quick. So I mean, this was, I think, Jason, did you find this? So the London Marathon. Highlighted. We had a topic a couple weeks ago talking about water sensors, and this is actually interesting because it's another way to deliver water that's more environmentally friendly. So a new tech company, I think, came out with a way to package water in a biodegradable, made from algae, like clear film, and I think you can open it up and then squeeze it out, or you can eat the whole darn thing if you want, which sounds a little unappealing to me. And I think they've got some other uses for it where they're looking to deliver other products that are liquid in this fashion. And you can, like I said, you can either eat it or you can throw it out. And I think in 3 weeks it disposes. I think Ian's not a big fan, but he's not really a fan of anything.
That's not true.
Pizza.
All right, pizza ice
and
cream.
Beer. Pizza, ice cream, and beer.
But I like the idea. I guess I'd have to see it in use. I mean, our runners here know that there is a talent to being able to snag a cup of water and drink it at pace in a race. I wonder if this is maybe a little bit easier to grab and then to kind of sip at and actually get the water when you need it.
Yeah, really tough to dump it on my head if it's hot.
Well, yes.
Well, but I guess I feel like it would be like a water balloon, right? You just be like, and just like, no. So, I mean, obviously the drive or the interest here is how many Dixie cups or plastic bottles. I mean, we're not handing out bottles anymore at spots, at rest stops. So you're talking about like these little Dixie cups and getting thrown into like this mixed recycled waste type deal. And that sort of thing, kind of after they're talking about plastic pollution kind of over time. But I think as a day, you're not going to carry one of these around in your bag. Really, it's a situation where you're going to have it at a race type situation where they'll be handing them out that way, and just another way to kind of to move water in these situations where we're just creating so much trash.
I think it was awesome. Yesterday we had water bottles.
Oh, did you? Full bottles?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
You're taking 2 mouthfuls and flinging, and it's it's disgraceful, really.
Yeah. But that's the difference in the U.S. Most of the races you get Dixie cups as open water containers. But most of the world you can't do that because either water quality or liability issues, things like that. So that's the difference of it, and that's one of the reasons why. Like, I don't have an issue of this as far as racing internationally. That's why if you go and watch some of the other races like in Mexico and in Europe, you get a little plastic baggie full of water. So these are replacing that or the water bottles. And I think it's much better than water bottles or plastic baggies. But for me personally, I'd prefer open cups of water because I can just dump it.
That's true. Yeah, I guess that's a good point, because international racing, I remember drinks and stuff like that with little straws in it for like kind of conventional things. But if they do that during races, that's where this is kind of coming from. But that's interesting. Yeah. So I guess trying to do better for the environment, kind of all in all. So excellent. All right. Anything else coming across anyone's feed? Or are we good?
One last thing.
Yeah, there it is.
Want to say congratulations to our endurance lab rat Mike Pugh. He did his first 70.3 yesterday and had a really good swim. Yeah, he had a good swim. He had a pretty sound bike. He he faded a little bit on the run, but did pretty good job. So 5:34.
Nice time.
That's
Yeah,
good.
and it was
Congratulations.
rainy conditions, so he did a good job. He did really well. And Mike actually had a little back injury 4 weeks ago. So he came off of that after a quick recovery and just rocked it. So super proud of Mike. He did a great job.
Awesome.
Just
to piggyback on that before we go, I did mention earlier before that we had a big group of our guys from the Pacific Northwest, from Spokane, racing in the Tour de Bloom up there. That's Justin Wagner's old stomping ground. But the guys, Ryan Kettleson, Ty Driscoll, and all the guys up there did a great job staying upright and getting through all the stages. It was a tough fought, but a lot of them got their good finishes. Top 10 with 3 of our riders up there, so really happy with that. I know the guys, Cat 4, is they're coming up, so they're really happy.
Sweet.
Awesome. So, all right. So, quick outro here. Thank you for joining us today here in the Coach's Corner. And if you like what you hear, and we would love it if you share with your friends. We hope that this has been informative. And if you have questions and would be interested in hearing us talk about it, send it over to coaches@endurancelab.fit. And don't forget, you could also follow us at Endurance Lab on Facebook and The Endurance Lab on Instagram, and online at endurancelab.fit. We'll see everybody on the next episode of the Coach's Corner. Cool.